Thank you everyone for joining. I am right now in Tel Aviv, so greetings from Israel. And I would love to know if folks can write in the chat, if they're able to, where they're joining from. It would be such a pleasure to know where folks are coming from. And in the meantime, I'm going to get my presentation ready here. So yeah, please feel free to write. Okay, we got Florida, we got Virginia, we got Arizona, Boston, Texas, Sweden. Wow. Massachusetts. Okay, this is beautiful. Very, very excited. Please keep on. Raisa, I'm not sure where Raisa is, but you got Memphis, Tennessee. Okay, really eclectic group here. Wellington, Wisconsin, great. Well, I'm here right now in Tel Aviv, but I am usually based in Detroit. And but I grew up in Seattle and also spent many years in New York. So kind of a little bit everywhere. So Mira, as people are coming in, you're able to admit them, right? It kind of pops up on my end, but great. Okay, wonderful. Well, let's dive in. We have a Motown Rocks. Yes. We have Mira an hour together, right? But I want to also make sure we'll have time for some questions. Friends, what we're going to do today is going to be a bit. It's going to be a bit dynamic. We're going to do a little bit of learning, but there's also going to be some storytelling, and I hope to leave enough time for questions as well, and comments and reflections from your own experiences and lives and identities. So let's see how much we're able to explore together in this hour. But I just want to emphasize that this is just the beginning of a conversation. This topic we can talk about for a long time. And so I will start sharing my screen. Wonderful. Okay. Great. I think there's a few. And I just want to hide the video, hide the floating meeting controls. Great. Okay, friends, you can see my slideshow. Great. Mira, is there a little bar on the bottom? No? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so I want us to start with, I just want us to hit the ground running. And we're going to do a little activity right now, a little globe-trotting activity. And this will all make sense in a moment why we're doing this. Mira, also, if by any reason the internet gets spotty or anything, you just let me know and I'll move somewhere else. And yeah, as folks are getting admitted, the bar shows up, but it's okay. We'll make it work. So let us embark on this globe-trotting journey, and it's going to be a little trivia game. So let's begin. Located. Oops. Sorry. Keeps on moving. Okay, good. Located on the island of Djerba in Tunisia, this old synagogue is marked by distinctive blue tile work in the interior. According to local Jewish tradition, it's believed that after the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, the first holy temple, a group of Kohanim, of priests, fled to Djerba, bringing with them a door and a stone from the temple, which contributed to the construction of this synagogue. What is the name of this synagogue? And feel free to write it in the chat. Your guesses, even if you're not sure, take a guess. Is it Al-Karima, Al-Ghriba, Al-Maghrib, or El-Kenisa? And the answer, friends, is El-Ghriba. The Cairo Geniza is a collection of about 400,000 Jewish manuscript fragments that were found in the Geniza, the storeroom of an ancient synagogue in Old Cairo, also known as Fustat. Written in Hebrew, Judeo-Arabic, Aramaic, Greek, Ladino, and other languages. These documents span 1,000 years of Jewish Mediterranean, African, and Asian history. What's the name of the synagogue? Oops, that was a note for me. But I decided to show a fragment, a Judeo-Arabic fragment from the synagogue? Is it the Kahira synagogue, Maimonides, Ben Ezra, or Ibn Maimun? And the answer is it's the Ben Ezra synagogue. Okay, this central synagogue, the central synagogue of this ancient city, has been a place of worship for Syrian Jews since at least the 5th century Common Era. But according to tradition, the foundation of this Beit Knesset, of this synagogue, was actually constructed by King David's general Yoav, which is why it's sometimes referred to as the Yoav synagogue. And the structure suffered significant damage during the 1947 anti-Jewish riots in the city. What's the city's name of this central synagogue? Is it Damascus, Aleppo, Kamishli, or Beirut? This is the Central Aleppan Synagogue that is no longer in use, but we have some wonderful photos of it. During a traditional Yemeni Jewish wedding, the bride is bedecked with jewelry and wears a tashbuk, an elaborate cone-shaped headdress decorated with flowers and pearls. The history of Yemeni Jews in the Arabian Peninsula is over 2,600 years old. But only a handful are estimated to still be remaining in Yemen, and the majority of Teimanim, of Yemeni Jews, reside in Israel, with a population of, is it 50K, 120K, 210K, or 430,000 people? And the answer is 430,000 Jews, Yemeni Jews of Taimani descent currently reside in Israel. Now let's make our way a little bit more north from the Arabian Peninsula. Jews have lived in Iraq since at least the Babylonian exile, 586 BCE, having produced important religious works like the Babylonian Talmud, as well as Judeo-Arabic literature. The tomb of this biblical prophet is located in Iraq and has long been an important place of worship for Iraq's ancient community. What's the name of the prophet? This is the tomb. Is it the tomb of Daniel, of Ezra, of Ezekiel, or of Jeremiah? And the answer is this is the tomb of Yehezkel, of Ezekiel, in Al-Kifl, Iraq. It's a really beautiful site that has for centuries and centuries been an important place of worship and pilgrimage for the Babylonian Jewish community. Okay, making our way back to North Africa. Jews have lived in Libya for over 2,000 years under Greek, Roman, Arab, Ottoman, Italian, and British rule. Waves of anti-Semitic violence and persecution in the second half of the 1900s led to the destruction of many Jewish sites, including this 1,000-year-old synagogue, the Abu Shaif synagogue, that no longer exists, is no longer standing, but we have photos of it. And this led to the mass migration of Libyan Jews, with the last Jew in all of Libya leaving in which year? 2000, 1975, 2020, or 2003? And the answer is 2003. But I do want y'all to give your guesses in the chat. All right, we're almost done with our little tour here. Bukharian Jews are the ancient Jewish community of Central Asia. They speak a Jewish dialect of which language? Is it Arabic, Russian, Uzbek, or Persian? And the answer is they speak a Jewish dialect of Farsi, of Persian, that they call Bukharian. Back to North Africa, the only currently functioning Jewish museum in the Arab world is found where? Is it found in Tunis, Tunisia, Alexandria, in Egypt, Casablanca, Morocco, or Beirut? The answer is Casablanca. I was actually fortunate enough to be there several years ago, and I took this photo in the museum in Casablanca. The majority of France's Jewish population is of North African descent, mainly from Algeria. As was the case in other parts of North Africa, Jews first arrived in Algeria over 2,000 years ago, settling among the Amazigh, often also referred to as the Berber people. Numbering 140,000 people in the mid-20th century, How many Jews live in Algeria today? 10, 25, or 0? And the answer is 0. Here we actually have this a photo of this beautiful synagogue in Oran, Tunisia. This synagogue and another one in Oran, Algeria. This synagogue and another one in Algiers. These two beautiful synagogues. They're still standing today, but they have been formed into mosques, into Muslim places of worship, and so there's some trauma here with this story. There are several distinct South Asian Jewish communities. Including the millennia-old Cochin and Bnei Israel Jews, as well as the centuries-old Spanish, Portuguese, and Baghdadi Jews. Within the Baghdadi Jewish community, prominent tycoon and business families emerged in the 1800s. And they funded the construction of many public buildings in India, but also synagogues. And this is, by the way, one of those synagogues. This is Knesset Eliyahu in Mumbai. What is this family's surname? Is it Sassoon, Hanan, Hassan, or Sofer? Family's name is Sassoon. Greece. We're going to the Balkans for a second. Greece has long been the home of two distinct Jewish communities. The Romaniot Jews, who comprise the oldest Jewish community of Europe. They're different than Ashkenazi or Sephardi Jews. It's a distinct community. And the Ladino-speaking Sephardic Jews with origins in Spain and Portugal. Until the Nazi occupation that resulted in the near extermination of Greece's Jews, Greece was a vibrant center of Sephardic culture for centuries, especially this city that was called the Jerusalem of the Balkans. Is that city Yanina, Athens, Rhodes, or Salonika? Salonika. Going back to West Asia, the Aramaic-speaking Jews of Kurdistan have inhabited this region since the Assyrian exile, so over 2,700 years ago. Born in 1592, the first recorded female rabbinical scholar hails from this region. What is her name? Is it Farha Sassoon, Asnat Barzani, Devora Bat Yaakov, or Aziza Toledano? And the answer is the first recorded woman rabbinical scholar. Also, she was referred to in others as a rabbi. Is Osnat Barzani. Dana International is a world-famous trans Mizrahi singer of Yemeni Jewish descent. She's an Israeli LGBTQ plus icon and the winner of the 1988 Eurovision Song Contest. What is her non-stage name? Liran Cohen, Galit Aharon, Sharon Cohen, or Ruti Dahari? Dana International's non-stage name is Sharon Cohen. Spanish, Portuguese, Sephardic Jewish poet Emma Lazarus, many of us know her for her sonnet, The New Colossus, right? Whose excerpts are inscribed on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. Give us, you're tired, you're poor. Lesser known are several poems that she wrote expressing and exploring same-sex attraction and love. What was the name of one of these poems? Affirmation, assurance, creation, or liberation? The answer is assurance. And the last fun fact here. Famous Israeli Mizrahi singer Sarit Haddad officially came out of the closet and revealed her partner Tamar Yahalomi when she released the song Ahava Kamo Shelanu, A Love Like Ours, in 2021. What community does she hail from? Georgian Jews, Mountain Jews, Bukharian Jews, or Moroccan Jews? Sarit Haddad, whose birth name was Sarit Huda Datov, is part of the mountain Jewish community, and her parents are from Dagestan. Okay, so we just did this big kind of a globe-trotting journey. We embarked on this journey around the world, and hopefully it was a little bit fun. Some of this trivia, but the question is, why am I showing these slides? Why did I decide to begin with these slides? The last couple were actually about LGBTQ plus Sephardic and Mizrahi icons and figures. But before that, I showed quite a few slides that didn't particularly refer to or address the queer Sephardic and Mizrahi story. So why was I showing these slides? In starting a conversation about the intersection of LGBTQ plus Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews. The reason is because a lot of what I have presented, now maybe this audience is a little bit different because you are all inquisitive and clearly want to learn more and deepen your knowledge of the Jewish world. But typically when I show these slides, the information in them is quite surprising to people. Either they were completely unaware of certain communities that I presented, or they might have known a little bit, but not concrete historical facts and ideas about these communities. And that is a real shame. The stories that I shared here, some of these facts, these snapshots, are snapshots that allow us to start exploring the deep-rooted and rich and eclectic history of Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews. It allows us to start exploring the histories and cultures and experiences of Jewish communities that have, particularly in the American context, quite often been on the margins. And so in showing these images, I want to be very clear. This was a bit of a trivia game, but I'm also in no way trivializing the depth and diversity of the greater Sephardic and Mizrahi experience. This is just the tip of the iceberg. But hopefully it starts a conversation about stories and experiences that we know far less about in the American Jewish context. Or if we know about them, they're often discussed as or depicted as exotic or footnotes in the history, as opposed to having their rightful place in the middle of the Jewish story, the eclectic story of the Jewish people. The other reason why I show these slides is for folks to start thinking about, it's kind of similar to what I was saying. Why are some experiences and histories of the Jewish world centered, while others have been relegated to the margins? And this, again, friends, is before I even add the LGBTQ plus piece. As I will continue, we will see that the story becomes, in a way, even more relegated to the margins when we add the LGBTQ plus piece. And so, in other words, what I said before can also be summed up in the following question. For many in the US, what makes this stereotypically Jewish? And these are important parts of the Jewish story, right? We're not minimizing them. But maybe not this. Now, some folks here might say, no, this is deeply Jewish for me. Maybe I belong to these communities, or I'm aware of global Jewish diversity. But the reality is, this question still, this phenomenon of understanding Jewish life and Jewish culture, or cultures really, through a certain myopic lens, and portraying it through that narrow viewpoint, that phenomenon is still very much exists today. And I thank MJL for helping kind of push the envelope. But it is important to address this trend. And thankfully, it is changing now. But for me, it's very important to name it and for us to start thinking about, okay, when we talk about Jewish experiences, what experiences are we talking about? And is there room for all of these stories that I have kind of briefly touched upon thus far? And so I think the most compelling way, and again, Mira, you can, just to confirm, you're not seeing any gray bars anywhere, correct? Everything is clear. Can I get a thumbs up from some of the participants? Wonderful. And so I think one of the most powerful, in my research, in my work as an educator, as a community builder, I have realized that and concluded that one of the most kind of compelling ways in which we can honor this diversity that I've just spoken about, and I will continue speaking more about when I bring in the LGBTQ plus piece, the way in which we can honor that while also understanding the interconnectedness of the Jewish people, right? The diversity and the interconnectedness slash unity of the Jewish people. The way that we can hold both of those, right? Without and without including them, but exoticizing them or making them seem particularly foreign. I think the best way to do that is through what I call the Mosaic Jewish peoplehood framework. I'm a very visual person, so for me, I need to see and understand things visually. And I think ultimately, this is a mosaic is a really powerful way to think about this beautiful duality of the Jewish people. How we are, on the one hand, this diverse, eclectic group and collective, and yet we are a collective that feels a certain connection to one another. And so for me, a mosaic, what is it? It's this masterpiece made up of all these different tiles of different colors and shapes and sizes and textures. And they all have their own reality and they're all important. One piece falls off. It's not the same masterpiece. And at the same time, at any moment, we should be able to take a step back and appreciate the entire masterpiece. And so, friends, as we talk about Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewish experiences, particularly LGBTQ plus Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewish experiences, I want you to understand that these stories, that these histories, that these experiences are important tiles of the Jewish mosaic, right? They're not somewhere off to the side. They're part of this story. They're part of this masterpiece. And they deserve their place in it. And in honoring their place in this mosaic, we're actually ultimately gaining a deeper and more rich understanding and appreciation of the Jewish people. And so ultimately, I think the discussion that we're having here, that we've already had with some of the facts that I introduced and that we're going to continue to have, it's really not only about lifting up maybe stories that have been on the margins, but it's about developing a deeper appreciation of the beautiful and diverse and eclectic story of the Jewish people. It's about really celebrating the Jewish mosaic. Okay, now with all of this, I'd like to tell you a little bit more now about my story and how it fits into this mosaic. So that's a little picture of me. Like every good Soviet child, I had one of these orange tinted photos taken of me in Uzbekistan. And that's where I am from. I was born in Uzbekistan to an ancient Persian-speaking Jewish community that has lived in Central Asia for millennia. According to our story, we've essentially been there since the Babylonian expulsion and the subsequent Persian rule of that region, during which time, under King Cyrus, some Jews went back and were allowed to go back to rebuild the Second Temple, but others stayed. And that is really the beginning of the story of, let's say, Jews of Iraq, Jews of Iran, and the Jews of Central Asia. So that's our story. That's my story. I just realized that it's almost the same color, my shirt, and the orange hue of this photo. Clearly, I'm very happy here. No, I'm not. This is, I start with this because when I tell my story, because my my origins in Uzbekistan and in Central Asia, and my belonging to the Bukharian Jewish community, to the Bukharian Jewish story. And Bukharian Jews, that's the name that we have given, that we refer to ourselves as. These are the Persian-speaking, ancient Jewish, Persian-speaking Jews of Central Asia who've been there for many, many years. So if I say Bukharian Jews or Central Asian Jews, I'm using those interchangeably. And so again, my origins in Uzbekistan, my origins as someone not born here, as someone who is an immigrant, as someone who actually came here with my family in '93 as refugees seeking asylum, as someone who is part of the history of Jews in the Islamic world, all of those things have played a very, very important role in the way in which I engage with the world, both the Jewish world and the kind of work I have done as a Jewish educator and community leader, but also that background has informed just my worldview, a more global worldview, a worldview that understands that, American experiences are important, but they're only part of the story, both again in the Jewish world and beyond. It's a worldview that has given me a lot more, a real sense of empathy and sensitivity towards communities and individuals whose stories are lesser known. And so that's where I begin. And I also want to bring into the space a photo that you already saw, but I didn't tell you who was in this photo. This photo, if you remember, was in the slide on Bukharian Jews, right? When I was talking about what language they speak. Well, friends, this is actually a photo of my family. And it says 1905, it's actually 1903. I learned more recently. I'm very, very blessed that my grandfather, may he rest in peace, has preserved this photo and kept it in really wonderful condition. And these are my ancestors. This is my history. These are the shoulders on whom I'm standing. And so when I bring my ancestors into this space, into this conversation about Sephardic and Mizrahi histories and identities and LGBTQ plus experiences and the intersection of those, it's important for me to bring my past in, to bring my ancestors into this space. I'll just very quickly tell you that here, this on the left is my great-grandmother. Her name is Shoshana. And this is her brother, Libi, and his wife, Freha. And I mean, there's so much we can do in close reading this photo. We won't, we're gonna move on, but there's a lot here to unpack. One thing though that I just wanna mention right now, besides the fact that you can tell a lot through the attire, through the garb, and you can also tell that this is in a particularly, kind of interesting moment in Bukharian and Central Asian history in general, because we have, the traditional clothing here, right? Very much influenced by the clothing that our Muslim neighbors would wear. But you also have here already the Russian influence, right? You have the samovar here, because by this point it was already part of imperial, not Soviet Union, but part of imperial Russia. But I just wanted to say here, one thing is that you almost never find in these old photos people touching or holding hands. Look what's happening here. So my great uncle and his wife, they are interlocked, like their arms are interlocked, but also with my great-grandmother. And what my grandfather, may he rest in peace, says is that the three of them were thick as thieves. They were like the best of friends. And so they're showing it here. I love it. I absolutely love it. I also, by the way, want to comment on the fact that women in my community wore what essentially are kippot. We call it kalpok. And so another thing that kind of pushes, our perceptions of, folks often in America think, okay, this is something that emerged in the Reform movement, but there were other examples in various communities, Jewish communities, of, for example, in Central Asia, where women were wearing these kinds of head coverings. Okay, and just very quickly, for those who might not know where Central Asia is, I always show this map because folks then ask me, and so I put it in here. Central Asia is, as the name connotes, in the heart of Asia, right? At the crossroads of East Asia, South Asia, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, the Middle East, which includes the Arab world and Iran and Kurdistan, and Russia. So at the crossroads of those four regions is someone. I actually asked a person once, what do you think is in the middle of all that? And I had somebody tell me, I don't know, an ocean. So it's not an ocean. It is a big chunk of land we today refer to as Central Asia. And Jews have lived in this part of the world for 2,000 plus years. This region is also famous for having been on many cities that were on the Silk Road, right, connecting east to west. And so the Jewish communities of this region played a role in that mercantile history. And just like the broader society, they were influenced by the regions surrounding them. And that is reflected in our dress, in our food, in our music. All those layers of history are there. And so where does my story continue? Well, it took me, I wanted to say one more thing about being Bukharian, which will then connect to me coming out as gay and as part of the LGBTQ plus queer community. So the thing I first want to say right now before addressing that is there was a significant moment in which I was ashamed of my Bukharian identity, of my Central Asian immigrant refugee identity. I wanted to be like a typical American, whatever that meant. And when I realized, okay, maybe not that, then I said, okay, I want to be like the typical American Jew, whatever that meant. And I didn't want my mom to speak in front of my friends too much because she had an accent. And I didn't want to reveal the fact that I'm from a country that many people didn't know or couldn't pronounce. And I didn't want them to smell the food that I loved, but that I thought would probably be too out there for them. And so I wanted to hide that part of me. It was a source of, dare I say, a little bit of shame for me. And there are many stories I can tell. I can tell about this, but one that comes to mind is I was invited to my first sleepover when I was 8 years old, and my mom just couldn't understand, like, what is this? You're going to be going to somebody's home, sleeping on the floor in the basement in a bag? Like, we came from Uzbekistan for this? And I was so embarrassed. I'm like, Mom, don't let me, I need this. I need to have this. I need to do this. Even though I myself did not want to sleep in a bag on the floor, right? But I wanted to fit in so badly. And this is just one of the many misunderstandings we had throughout the years. But ultimately, I realized that my immigrant identity, my Central Asian Mizrahi identity, which, by the way, I know this term, I didn't, sometimes in these sessions, I even do like a deep dive into the terms and what they mean and how they mean different things for different folks. Suffice it to say right now, friends, when I use Sephardic and Mizrahi, and when I combine them actually together, what I'm referring to is a beautiful tapestry of communities with distinct histories and cultures and languages, but communities that have had a certain strong level of interconnection, spanning from Spain through North Africa into West Asia, also known as the Middle East, some of the Balkans, and Central Asia. And that's a big chunk of the world. But one thing that has connected us for a long time was actually living under Islamic rule and experiencing a certain level of security. And I don't want to say everything was perfect, but a certain level of security and stability that allowed these communities of Asia and Africa to really flourish, and allowed for a movement of ideas and people from Baghdad to Morocco to Cordoba to Bukhara. But the term is still, or these two terms, Sephardic and Mizrahi, which also kind of have their own trajectories, but I and many others often combine them to honor this kind of diverse history. I also want to name that these terms can sometimes flatten the story of these deep-rooted ancient communities of North Africa, West Asia, and Central Asia. but they can also empower us, because one thing that unites us is the fact that our stories have often been on the margins. So with time, I actually really reclaimed my Bukharian identity, my Mizrahi identity, my immigrant identity, and my Central Asian Jewish identity. And then, as I was really reconnecting to that and realizing that this is something that is a strength, it's just something that can allow me to build bridges, both in the Jewish world, but also Muslim-Jewish interfaith bridges. As I was really connecting to that and feeling empowered by that, I started also kind of pointing the mirror or placing the mirror in front of me to try to understand something that I don't think I was ever denying or in denial about. This is just my own story, but something that I really was not allowing myself to fully explore. And that's who I want to connect to romantically, who I want to have as a partner, the kind of fully authentic life I want to lead. And we all have our own stories, right? Mine takes me to age 24, when a very big a cataclysmic family trauma happened. This is beyond the scope of this conversation. I'll just kind of leave it at that. But that moment really shook my world, really turned my world upside down, and made me realize for the first time that something that maybe is a little cliche, but there's a reason why we have these platitudes, because there's some universal truth in them. And that cliche statement was that tomorrow really is not guaranteed. This trauma, this moment, this sudden, extremely difficult moment really made me face life and death for the first time, and made me realize that, yeah, tomorrow's not guaranteed. And that can be really depressing, or it can really make us live intentionally today, right? I'm blessed with today. One of my favorite prayers in the Jewish tradition is Modeh Ani, right? We say this in the morning. Those of us who want to, Cheryl is like going, woo, Modeh Ani lefanecha melechai vekayam shehazarti b'nishmati b'chemara b'emunatecha. Which essentially says, thank you, God, the divine energy, the universe, for returning my soul to me. I didn't have to wake up today, but I did, right? And for me, this is a perfect example, a really beautiful Jewish example of something that's very like sexy now, which is mindfulness and gratitude, right? We have this in our tradition. We have a very beautiful feeling in our tradition. And I realized this. It finally made sense to me that yes, it was both a very sobering to know that I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow, but it also was a call to action. It was very inspiring, and it was energizing to say, okay, but I owe it to myself today to live my life as authentically and as honestly and as possible. And so I actually started I went on a journey of trying to understand more of what does all this mean, all these things that I'm feeling. And I wasn't scared and I wasn't ashamed. This is just my story. But I had to give myself the time and the space to really figure it out. And ultimately, it did all make sense. All of these parts of who I am, including my queer identity, my identity and my connection to the LGBTQ plus community, that kind of, those, I don't want to say final tiles because it's an ongoing journey of exploration in terms of our identities, but those pieces of the puzzle, when they fit in, I really felt shalem, as we say in Hebrew, whole. And I felt even more deeply connected then to the other parts of my identity. Now I want to take a break. I want to take a pause here. And that final thing that I said, I made it sound like it just happened overnight, and it didn't. The journey of me bringing together all the parts of who I am, including this more in my 20s, more recently, I don't want to say discovered, but more recently kind of harnessed and embedded part of me. It wasn't me. The journey wasn't overnight that I was able to kind of bring them all together. But once I did, they actually enhanced one another. And so me being part of the LGBTQ plus community actually deepens my connection to my Jewish identity and to my Mizrahi identity. But here, and this is a photo I took a while ago. This is a Bukharian kippah, one of these beautiful, elaborate kippot that both that folks of different genders in the Bukharian community wear. And one of my favorite dishes, it's kind of like a Bukharian risotto. It's a sticky rice. We call it sholamosh. And I have the pride flag. And this is me just in a kind of visual way trying to hold some of these parts of my identity. And coming out to folks in my family, I'm not even going to say in the community, because ultimately I just cared about my immediate family, and they are all Bukharian. It was a source of anxiety for me, but not for the same reason, but not for the reason that some folks here might think, which is a very real reason, which is the fact that, in my community, with some of the traditional values, some of which are really beautiful, but with that has also come certain social norms that do not create a vibrant space for those of us who are not cis hetero folks. And so many Bukharians who have shared with me their stories, many queer Bukharians have told me that that is what has made it really hard for them to come out. And I hear that. For me, I was just actually more nervous about my family not knowing. I was nervous to tell them something that I knew that they did not know about me. And I love, like, for example, my mother. I love her deeply and dearly. She's an amazing, amazing woman. And in many ways knows me better than I know myself. And so I was worried that if I share this with her, this part that I knew for sure she didn't know about me, but an important part, a part that, again, would allow me to be, not only live my life as authentically, but deepen the relationship I have with my mother. I knew that if I thought to myself, if I share this with her, and she doesn't know this about me, that she might think of herself as less of a mother because she didn't know this thing about me. I overthink things, but it really came from that place of love, of me thinking that she's going to know something that she didn't know, and it might make her question her own motherly intuition. Well, I finally, after many times of saying I'm going to do it, when I would visit Seattle, and I found myself paralyzed, and I was surprised because I know my mother is very loving, but I then was able to articulate why it was so difficult. Well, I ultimately, one day I woke up, and I just knew that morning, I can't explain it, but I knew that by the end of that day, my mother would know that she has a gay son. And it wasn't a perfect moment or anything. I was actually in New York, but I called her up, and I was I was emotional, and I was kind of circumventing the issue. And my mother was getting very nervous because, I'm anxious, but I'm not saying what it is. And so she was saying, Ruben, you're scaring me. Tell me, what is this? She thought maybe it was a health related issue. And so then I told her, and you know what she said? She said, in the most classic, beautiful mom way of my mom, like knowing her, I couldn't have asked for a better response. She said, that was it. That was it, right? And it wasn't to belittle this. It wasn't to say you're making a mountain out of a molehill. But what she was trying to say was, you really thought you needed to keep this from me. And she said, I'm so sad that you've been carrying this burden, right? And I'm so, and it was a really, really beautiful, really the perfect thing that she could have said. And I know that many folks and parents and loved ones might not have the perfect thing that they say when their loved ones come out. So I'm very careful when I share the story because I don't want everybody to think that this is how it always happens. But my mother, who again is an incredible figure in my life, I asked her, I said, Mom, did you see this coming? And she said, no. And that's what actually made that response that much more amazing, that she was in a way kind of blindsided, right? But she knew the right thing to say, which was, number one, you can tell me. And I'm so sorry that you felt like you had to hold this. And then almost immediately after that, she said, as long as you're happy and healthy, I will always be there for you and I will always love you. And that's all I needed to hear. That's all of us LGBTQ plus folks want to hear. It's not necessarily, folks think we want everybody to march with us in the parade and be like these, really passionate allies. That would be wonderful. But at the end of the day, we just want someone to say, I see you for who you are and I love you. I will always love you. And as long as you're happy and healthy, this is what I care. Not these other things that are that you think might make me love you any less. And so I always bring my mom into the story because it was a very powerful moment for me, especially again knowing that she was literally processing it in the moment. And I also bring the story up because sometimes we have this idea of if you come from these more traditional communities, then everybody must be homophobic. And we can't paint it with that broad of a stroke. My story, my coming out story as a Bukharian Jew is part of the story, right? Just like other stories. And there are more troubling and traumatic stories, but this is also part of it. And so I bring it as a way to, number one, both hopefully give some folks hope who are coming from backgrounds like mine, but also to show other folks that there's no one way or one kind of reaction, a monolithic reaction that immigrant communities might have. Having said that, I was very aware that being an out Bukharian Jew could cause and create some conversations and some pushback, if you will. And in my community especially, there is a lot of emphasis on how you kind of present yourself and on, honor, right? And so the reality is, my grandparents, and I'm being very, very vulnerable here, I actually never came out to my grandparents, my elderly Bukharian grandparents, because there was too much of a gap between me and them in terms of how they viewed the world, in terms of their kind of their understanding of things, and it was rooted in these cultural norms. And I bring this, I am an LGBTQ leader, but I bring this up because we all have our own complex journeys, right? And that's part of mine, was the fact that I didn't come out to them. And who understands this particularly is my immigrant queer friends, my LGBTQ friends who also come from different traditional communities, but who are deeply connected to their cultures, but also know that their queer identities are a salient part of who they are, and they don't want to forego one for the other. And that means that there are these difficult moments. And I have family members who don't speak to me really in the same way anymore. And that's part of the reality as well. And so we have a little bit of time left, but I want to go from my story, and I've actually never shared it in this kind of depth, but I thank you for kind of holding me and allowing me to use this as a space in which to kind of get personal like this, right? So we did a little bit of kind of, we explored more broadly Sephardic and Mizrahi communities, including some important figures among so many that I didn't mention. We talked about Dana International, we talked about Sadi Haddad, Emma Lazarus, so many more. And then I wanted to zoom in on the story, but now I'm going to zoom out a little bit, but still stay grassroots. In New York is when I then moved to New York, and I was really able to finally hold all these parts of who I am. And in doing that, I started asking myself, first for my purposes, where do I, as a Bukharian, Central Asian, Sephardic, Mizrahi, queer Jew, where can I bring all these parts of who I am? Where do I fully belong? And it was a hard question to answer because I didn't feel like there was really a space where I could fully show up. And then I started meeting other folks at the intersection of similar identities. An Iranian lesbian friend of mine, a trans Egyptian Jewish friend of mine, a Yemenite Iraqi Israeli gay friend of mine. These are actually people I'm actually thinking of right now. And I realized that I wasn't the only one feeling this, that speaking to them, I started to understand that there's a bigger problem here that is making those of us at the crossroads of these identities really feel alone and lonely, or feel like we are cutting parts of ourselves, right? Compartmentalizing parts of ourselves and only being certain parts to and checking others at the door. And so I asked myself, where do we, as Sephardic and Mizrahi LGBTQ plus Jews, where do we fully belong? Are there spaces that exist in which we can bring our full selves and all the different parts of our identities? Using the mosaic model that I said before, all the tiles of our individual mosaics. And I realized that the answer was not really, right? In these vibrant LGBTQ plus Jewish spaces, which are very, I have colleagues that work in these spaces. They're wonderful and they've done a lot and have covered a lot of ground. But for a long time, it's changing a little bit now, thankfully. But for a long time, I felt like my Bukharianness, right? That part of my identity, it wasn't welcome, but there wasn't really a space for it. Programming didn't really reflect Sephardic and Mizrahi experiences. The leadership didn't reflect these communities. And so I thought, okay, I guess this part I'll just check at the door. I'm just so happy to be in queer Jewish spaces, I thought. Like, who am I to complain? But then also in my Bukharian community, right? I have to say it like it is. In this vibrant, rich community or communities, it's not really just one, I also felt like while there were individuals who were allies and who were there for me, I felt like in various, bigger gatherings, in communal gatherings, in many of these public spaces, that this is something else that, I'm not really going to bring. And so what was really at work was both kind of some of this ashkenormativity that we were talking about before, of having certain stories be in the center, right, even in Jewish LGBT spaces. And then in the Mizrahi Sephardic spaces, issues of homophobia and transphobia that the communities, by the way, are working their way through, right? We got to also give it some time. And so in realizing that these spaces didn't exist, we built, me along with some wonderful leaders, pioneering leaders, we built an organization. And it started, like I said, from this urgency, understanding that there needed to be a space where we as queer Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews could bring all of us without checking anything at the door. And we first started with a Facebook group, right? So right now we're going to get a little glimpse in the final minutes of like how a grassroots movement emerges, right? It started as a private Facebook group, but then we started hosting these pop-up Shabbat dinners in different homes around the city, in New York City. And it was very important for the gatherings, when I was envisioning how we're building this community, this grassroots community, it was very important to have two things. Number one, to have it be around the Shabbat dinner table, because I wanted us to reclaim our traditions, not only our Jewishness, but our distinct Mizrahi Sephardic Jewishness. And a lot of that is centered on and around the Shabbat table, the Shabbat dinner and lunch table. And for many of us, that was such an important part of our Jewish identity. That's where you heard the sounds, the smells, the tastes of the sights of our particular Sephardic and Mizrahi cultures were reflected at the Shabbat table. But for many of us, when we started coming out, those spaces became less accessible. We were less we were less able to connect to them because of these other important parts of who we are, our queer identities. And so I knew that if we were going to gather together and create this community, we needed to gather around the Shabbat dinner table and the Shabbat lunch table. And I also knew that I wanted this to be pop-up style. I wanted this to be in the homes of different people so that they can take ownership of this experience, and they can flex their leadership muscles. And so then we have grown. From Shabbat dinners, we had then other gatherings like Shabbat lunches and various learning programs. And hence and thus, the Sephardic Mizrahi Q Network was born and has been thriving for over, we have just celebrated the fifth. In February, we celebrated the 5th year anniversary of our first Shabbat gathering. The virtual community is a bit longer, it's a bit older, but that was our first in-person gathering. And I know we're almost out of time, but I want to just say a couple of things about our community. And so just to kind of mention, and you can also check us out more on social media and online, SMQ and the Sephardic Mizrahi Q Network is really the sole international organization that works to create this empowering and affirming and nurturing space for folks in an intersection of queer, Mizrahi, Sephardic, Jewish identities. And while we are rooted in lifting up the voices of Sephardic and Mizrahi, queer Jewish folks, we welcome all LGBTQ plus individuals who want to connect to our mission of celebrating that mosaic that I've told you about previously. And so here are just a few photos of our, this essentially, I've kind of mentioned our mission, in supporting this often overlooked segment of the Jewish world, and how in doing this, we really think it enriches the Jewish world at large. And so we've had throughout the years so many different gatherings, virtual learning gatherings, and Shabbat dinners, and international partnered events with LGBTQ plus Jewish organizations in Latin America, and in Israel, and in Europe. And through this, we have really built, and this is, I'm getting kind of towards the end now here, we have really built a vibrant, not just community, I would say family. And in the LGBT world, the idea of a chosen family is very, very important. And we have been able to, like, look at me, here I am with my dear friend who's also Bukharian. I'm wearing the Bukharian robe, right? And this other friend of mine who's not Bukharian, but he wanted to put on the Bukharian kippah, right? And what we created was an opportunity for folks to do something that, you know what, everybody should be able to do, whether you're LGBT plus or not, which is bringing all of the parts of who you are and not needing to check anything, not needing to compartmentalize anything, not needing to divide yourself into different pieces. And so in doing this work, I hope it can inspire, this is a retreat that we had, a Shabbaton retreat, I hope it'll inspire all of you, number one, to connect to the layers and the different parts of who that make up who you are, right? We are all our own eclectic mosaic. But number two, I hope it will also inspire you, if you're a leader especially, and a convener, to create environments where people don't have to bring only certain parts of who they are. And for me, ultimately, my friends, this actually makes us, not only does this empower those folks who are sometimes the most vulnerable and marginalized in our communities, but it ultimately enriches us all. And so on that note, I will say thank you. And I so appreciate your time. I know I have a couple of minutes. I know we're at the hour mark, but I would love to take any questions if you might have. As I'm scrolling through just more of these beautiful photos that we have of our community. Oh, and just this part, if I can quickly say, we didn't get to it, but that's okay. Maybe we'll have a part two, but it's really almost like its own, it really should be its own conversation. I wanted to bring two texts, and then we'll get to Cheryl. I wanted to bring two texts that show that, by the way, that challenge the assumption that in Sephardic and Mizrahi, Middle Eastern, North African Jewish communities, the idea of a same-sex love and romance and queer themes. I mean, yes, that term might not have been used in the past. It's kind of a more modern term. But this idea that queer themes, did not exist in the past, or were not engaged with, or there wasn't an openness and a compassion towards that kind of diversity, the concept, the perspective, the conception that happened is just erroneous, right? That is that's just false. Now, I'm not trying to say that again, it was all perfect, but the reality is when we look at the eclectic history of the Sephardic Mizrahi Jewish world, there are many examples of these topics that we're talking about here, right? And it shows that at the very least, it wasn't something that was completely either ignored or shunned. And for many of us who are queer Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews, it really actually has been empowering and affirming to know that these texts and these discussions were, at least to some extent, part of our societies. And it also challenges this idea, this notion that, no, it was, only in Europe was there this kind of enlightenment. We know that definitely there's a lot of homophobia in the Christian world. And so here we have two poems that exhibit that. One poem from Al-Andalus, the Iberian Peninsula, during what is known as the golden age of Sephardic poetry, during a time when Spain was part of the Islamic world and was under Islamic rule. And so this real kind of a flourishing of Jewish cultural life happened during that time, 1,000 years ago. Some unbelievable poetry that was written, and liturgical poetry, and philosophical treatises and scientific works by Jews. And this poem, Shmuel ibn Nagrila, one of the famous poets of the time, who wrote very, very beautiful spiritual poetry and liturgical poetry about God, also wrote homoerotic poetry, right? So, for example, here, right, scrape me some honey from your hive, he said. I'll have mine from your tongue, I replied. Then he bristled and said to me, sullen, a sin before the living God, the sins on me, I answered. Right, so there's still that tension, but he's talking about it here. This is wild. I did not learn this in Jewish day school, when I was learning about Sephardic poetry. Here we have Emma Lazarus. Again, you see everything kind of coming together, who was in our fun facts, who many of us know from the New Colossus, whose excerpt is on the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty, correct? But she also had these homoerotic poems, including this one, that begins with, last night I slept, and when I woke, her kiss still floated on my lips. For we had strayed together in my dream through some dim glade where the shy moonbeam scarce dared light our bliss.